Working with different student populations. This is a training designed for SI leaders and tutors on working with English language learners, students with disabilities, and non-traditional students. Documents you will need to complete this training include the Learning Styles Assessment, pictured on the left, and the matrix, pictured on the right, entitled Working with Different Populations, Best Practices and Strategies. We encourage you to use this matrix to take notes on your key takeaways from this presentation. Let's set the stage by reviewing our objectives of this training. First, we hope you will reflect on your own learning experience and needs. Second, we hope that you will recognize and understand the needs of English language learners, also called ELLs, students with disabilities, and non-traditional students. And third, we hope you will walk away with the ability to implement specific techniques that cater to the student in a given session. As you may know, AU is a campus made up of a variety of different types of students with different learning experiences and abilities. And by learning about how to work with all students, we celebrate our community's diversity. In this training, we hope to give you the tools and techniques that will allow you to cater your tutoring and instruction to the student or group of students you are working with. And while the techniques and tips we'll cover today are applicable to the populations that we are specifically speaking about, you will find that you can and should be applying them even more broadly. Before we go any further, it's important that you know about your learning style. Let's start off by defining what a learning style is. Take a moment, pause the video, and read the italicized definition of what a learning style is. Knowing your own learning style, strengths and weaknesses can help you to better serve our students. You may consider asking your students how they learn best. You might do this at the beginning of a session, or at the middle, or when you are working through a problem and you notice that the way that you're working through the problem with the student, they're just not getting it. Maybe reframing the problem, maybe asking them if there's another way that they've done a similar problem in the past and gotten it, perhaps even from another discipline, is a good way to determine another learning style or another technique that you might use. Now it's time for you to do the Learning Styles Assessment. This document is 2 pages. Go through and place a check mark on the line for each statement that applies to you. At the end, you're going to total up your check marks to determine if you are a visual, an auditory, or a kinesthetic or tactile learner. Pause the video to be able to complete this worksheet. Then press play to resume when you've completed it. So now we want to know, are there any surprises? Are you tied for any? Many students find that visual and potentially auditory or kinesthetic are their highest learning styles. This may not be surprising given the way in which information is typically presented. We usually see advertisements for things, we see visuals in class, PowerPoint, etc. So we're conditioned to learn that way. Again, kinesthetic means learning by doing. This is the kind of thing, for instance, if you are asking a student how they learn best, you might say, how do you remember how to get to a friend's house? Do you have to hear the directions? Do you need to see the map? Or do you need to actually walk it or write it down? Asking that basic question is one example of how to assess a person's learning style. There are many more ways, such as online quizzes or even this kind of worksheet. We're happy to give you those supplies if you'd like them. Let's move on now to talking about English language learner, or ELL, and international students. We have a fun little reading and excerpt here for you, and we hope you'll take a minute to read it. Press pause, and then press play to resume and answer the questions. So, now that you've read this, what are your thoughts? All of these idiomatic expressions, they can be challenging. Have you ever thought about these before? Have you ever learned a second or maybe a third language? And have you learned these sayings or idiomatic expressions any things that break the rules. Imagine how challenging it is learning a language like English that does have a number of rules, but is kind of a mutt of a language, meaning that it takes and borrows from so many other different languages, and there seems to be an exception to every rule. Remembering the techniques that we review in this training can be great to helping your students who are ELL or international students become more comfortable, not just with the language, but communicating on the content in the target language. Some tips for tutors and SI leaders working with ELL and international students. Take a minute, pause the video, and review the different tactics on this page before moving on. Now that you've reviewed them, consider the following questions. Which of these strategies do you already utilize? What might you consider utilizing? What does it mean to put things that one studies in context? Does that mean using metaphors? Does it mean talking about it, how it connects to the larger world? It can mean both, and sometimes you might have to use both to ensure that your student truly gets it. How do we know if it's okay to correct a student? You can actually ask, being direct in saying, "Is it okay if I correct you?" or "How do you like to be corrected?" is the best way to get the answer to your question. More strategies for working with ELL and international students. Take a minute to review these strategies. Press pause, then press play when you're ready to reflect. Are any of these strategies new to you? Do you think that some of them will be challenging to use, and if so, why? What do you already do in your sessions, and how do you know that it works? Moving on, let's talk about students with disabilities. It's important to recognize that students with disabilities studying at AU can have a variety of disabilities. We define disability as a functional limitation or restriction of an individual's ability to perform an activity. They can still participate fully, but they simply may require accommodations or adjustments to ensure inclusion. You may work with students who have physical, psychiatric, learning, visual or hearing, or medical disabilities, but in today's training, we're only going to talk about students with learning disabilities, or LDs. A reminder that any student information you have, whether it's a student with an LD or otherwise, that student information, based on the disclosure policy that you have signed, must remain confidential. But if you ever need to discuss a concern you have about a student, please go to your supervisor in the ASAC, and we will be happy to walk through potential solutions for you and for the student. Let's discuss students with learning disabilities. We'll start off by defining what a learning disability actually is. A learning disability is a disability that affects the manner in which individuals take in information, organize it, retain it, and express the knowledge and understanding which they possess. Although adults with learning disabilities have average to superior intelligence, they may have deficits in reading comprehension, spelling, mechanics of writing, math computation, and/or problem solving. You may identify these kinds of issues in your tutoring sessions. And don't be afraid to employ the following strategies to assist your students. The strategies on the right are great tips and techniques to work with your students with learning disabilities. Take a moment to review them before reflecting on the questions that are posed. Pause the video now, press play to resume. Do you already do these things in your sessions? Can you think of one concrete example of a session past where you might have benefited from utilizing one of these techniques? And how might you use these techniques moving forward? Here are some additional strategies for working with students with learning disabilities. Pause the video now to review the strategies. Press play when you are ready to reflect. It's important to remember that it is not necessary for the SI leader or tutor to be the one doing all the talking or using all these strategies. For example, the third bullet down says, at the end of each session, summarize the main points that were discussed. How might you empower your tutee or students to actually be the ones that are doing the summarizing? You might consider posing the question, so let's review. What were the main points that we reviewed today? Or you might say, okay, think, pair, share. Turn to the person or to the people next to you and go ahead, summarize the main points discussed today. You might also have folks come and write up on the board or write at the tutoring station. Any way in which you can engage the student and empower them to be the active learner and processor, the better you are doing at assessing your students' knowledge. Now let's talk about non-traditional students. Who exactly is a non-traditional student? A non-traditional student is not the traditional college age, so meaning they're typically 25 or older. They might be in transition at home, so for example, they have been divorced, they have children in school, they have empty nest syndrome, and they decided to come back for another degree. Maybe there's transitions in their workplace, so they're going through a career change, a promotion, or back to school during retirement. This could be transfer commuting student, and it could also be a veteran, someone who has served and after a few years is coming back to school. Before we delve into the strategies, think about the following. How do you go about finding out if your student is a non-traditional one? You may not always know based on what they look like, based on how they speak, so building rapport is going to be especially important. Using phrases such as, tell me about yourself, or is there anything important that I should know before we begin working together, are ways that you can open up the conversation for a student to tell you a little bit more that might equip you to better serve them. Go ahead, take a moment to read the strategies on the right, then press play to resume the video. Now that you've reviewed these strategies, you're ready for some more. Review the strategies on this page about working with non-traditional students. Press pause and then press play to resume the video. Any of the strategies on this or the last slide stand out to you? Have you utilized any before, or can you point out a few that you intend to utilize moving forward? Press pause to think about your responses and then press play to resume. Now you're ready to demonstrate your understanding. Respond to the questions on the right via email to your supervisor or supervisors. Thank you again for your time and attention during this video, and we hope you are walking away equipped with the strategies and tools necessary to effectively reach all the different kinds of learners in your classroom.